The sun burned down on the narrow streets of Lisbon, turning every stone into fire. A small girl darted through the crowd, bare feet slapping against the cobblestones, her thin arms balancing a plastic crate filled with water bottles that had long since lost their chill. Her name was Lena. She was 10 years old, and before the day ended, she would make a choice that would change everything, one that would save a life and destroy her innocence in the same breath. What would you do if the only way to save the person you loved most was to break the one promise you swore never to break? Keep watching, because what happens to Lena will make you question what right and wrong really mean. That morning had started like all the others, with her mother's coughing echoing through their attic apartment. The sound was sharp, wet, and terrifying. The doctor at the clinic had said it was a lung infection that needed medication immediately. Without it, her mother wouldn't last a week. The hospital demanded a deposit, €200. Lena had 23. She counted it over and over again in the dark last night, whispering to herself that tomorrow she'd find the rest. She left home at dawn, tucking her mother's silver locket beneath her faded yellow dress. The pendant was small, engraved with a strange crest she didn't understand. Never lose this, her mother had told her. It's the only thing that connects us to where we came from. Lena didn't know what that meant, but she wore it always, even when she was hungry, even when she slept. By noon, the market was a war zone of sound, shouting vendors, crying babies, engines sputtering, and the unrelenting blaze of the Portuguese sun. Lena weaved through the chaos, offering bottles to passers-by. Cold water. 50 cents, she cried, her voice hoarse. Most people ignored her. A few smiled sadly. Others brushed past as though she were invisible. A tourist couple bought one bottle and told her to keep the change. €2, not even close. The hospital clock was ticking in her head. Every minute her mother's breathing was getting worse. Her stomach growled. Her throat burned. She whispered, "Just a little more, just enough." At the corner of the square, she spotted him. A tall man in a dark gray suit stepped out of a black Mercedes, speaking into his phone in low, commanding tones. His shoes gleamed. His watch looked like it could pay her mother's bills for a year. He was the kind of man people made room for. Lena watched as he reached into his pocket for a card, distracted, and his wallet slipped out unnoticed, falling onto the hot pavement. For a long second, nobody moved. The wallet lay there, sunlight glinting off the leather. She froze. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Never steal Lena, no matter how hard it gets." She took a step forward, then another. The crowd swirled around her, the city buzzing with indifference. She glanced toward the sky. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. And she picked it up. The instant her fingers closed around the wallet, her heart exploded in her chest. She turned and ran. Shouts rang out behind her. "Hey, stop that girl!" She didn't look back. The streets blurred. Her bare feet pounded over stone, through puddles, past startled vendors. A hand reached for her shoulder. She ducked under it and kept running. She turned down an alley behind the church, heart hammering, lungs burning. When she was sure no one had followed, she collapsed behind a stack of wooden crates. Her hands shook as she opened the wallet. Inside were bills, so many bills she couldn't count them all, and shiny cards with gold lettering. Her reflection trembled in one of them. "This could save her," she whispered. She looked up at the statue of the Virgin Mary, perched in the church courtyard, her stone face serene. "Please forgive me. I'll give it back. I promise." Her voice cracked. "Just let her live." She clutched the wallet to her chest and ran toward the hospital. By the time she arrived, the air smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Nurses rushed between patients. A mother sobbed quietly in the waiting area. Lena went straight to the front desk, slammed the money down with trembling hands. "Please, my mother. Clara Novak, she's upstairs. She needs medicine, please." The nurse blinked in shock. "Where did you get this, sweetheart? It doesn't matter. Please use it." The woman hesitated, then called for the doctor. Within minutes, they were wheeling her mother into a treatment room. The relief hit Lena like a wave. She sank to her knees in the hallway, whispering, "You're going to be okay, Mama." But as the adrenaline faded, another feeling crept in: fear. The man would notice. He'd report it. They'd find her. She thought about the wallet still in her pocket and the photo she'd glimpsed inside a younger woman smiling under a blooming cherry tree. Something about the woman's face had made her pause. It looked familiar. Too familiar. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Lena pressed her back to the cold wall, clutching the locket at her throat. She didn't know it yet, but the man whose wallet she had just stolen, the one whose voice had thundered across the market, carried not only her mother's face in that photograph, but also her own blood in his veins. That was the day innocence broke. The day one desperate choice tied their fates together. And for Lena, there would be no going back. The sound of her own heartbeat was louder than the shouts behind her. Lena tore down the narrow streets of Lisbon, clutching the stolen wallet against her chest. Her bare feet slapped against the pavement, kicking up dust as she darted between startled pedestrians and honking cars. The world became a blur of noise, sunlight, and fear. Every breath scraped her throat raw. She didn't look back. If she did, she knew she'd stop, and stopping wasn't an option. The man's voice carried through the chaos, deep and commanding. "Stop that girl. She took my wallet." Vendors turned. Drivers leaned on their horns. Someone pointed down the alley where Lena disappeared. But she was small, fast, and desperate, the kind of desperate that doesn't think, only runs. She cut through the tangle of market stalls, through a cloud of pigeons bursting into flight, and slipped into a maze of side streets she knew better than anyone. The world behind her faded, until only the sound of her own breathing remained. She ducked into a narrow passageway between two buildings, and pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until she was crouched low, the wallet gripped tight in her trembling hands. Her chest heaved. Sweat ran into her eyes. For a long moment she just listened, waiting for footsteps, a voice, anything. Nothing came. The chase was over. When she opened the wallet again, her fingers shook. She'd never held so much money in her life. Hundreds of euros in neat, crisp bills. Cards gleamed under the dim light filtering through the alley. She didn't even understand what most of them were. There was also a passport, an ID, and something else, a photo. She hesitated, then slid it out. It was a picture of a young woman standing beneath a canopy of pink blossoms, smiling. There was something soft about her face, familiar in a way that made Lena's stomach twist. She turned the photo over, hoping for a name, but there was only a faded ink smudge. She shoved it back and closed the wallet, guilt creeping up her throat like bile. "God," she whispered, clutching it tight. "Please forgive me. I'll give it back. I swear I will." She closed her eyes and saw her mother's face, pale, sweating, struggling to breathe in that tiny attic room. "But please not before I save her." Lena pushed herself to her feet and ran again, this time toward the hospital. Her legs felt heavy, her lungs on fire, but she didn't slow down. The thought of her mother lying there alone fueled her like lightning. When she finally burst through the hospital doors, her vision blurred. She went straight to the reception desk, her voice trembling as she laid the money down. "Please, my mother, Clara Novak, she's sick. She needs medicine. Please take it." The nurse blinked in shock, glancing from the stack of bills to the girl's dirt-streaked face. "Where did you get this? Please." Lena pleaded. "It doesn't matter. Just save her." Something in her voice, raw, pleading, more adult than a child's voice should ever be made. The nurse hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Wait here." Within minutes, a doctor appeared. There was a flurry of movement voices shouting orders, the squeak of wheels on tile. They rushed her mother into a treatment room. Lena followed until a nurse gently held her back. "You can't go in yet, sweetheart," the woman said softly. "Let them work." Lena sank onto a wooden bench, her knees weak with relief and fear. The wallet was still in her lap. She stared at it as if it were alive. Her mother was finally being treated. The nightmare might end, but what she had done, what if the man called the police? What if they came for her? The hospital cameras, the people in the market, they'd seen her face. She could already hear her mother's voice in her head. You don't fix pain by creating another. But wasn't a life worth this one sin? Across the city, in an office that overlooked the harbor, Alexander Holt leaned back in his leather chair, his jaw tight. How could this even happen? His assistant shifted uneasily. "Sir, you dropped it near the Central Market. We checked the footage. A little girl picked it up and ran." Alexander frowned. "A little girl?" The assistant nodded. About 10 years old, blonde hair, wearing a yellow dress. Locals say she's always there selling water, lives near the river. Alexander turned to the window, his reflection cold and unreadable. "Find her," he said quietly. Back at the hospital, the doctors worked for hours. Lena waited on that same bench, her eyes never leaving the double doors at the end of the hall. When a nurse finally emerged, wiping sweat from her brow, Lena jumped to her feet. "Your mother's stable," she said. "The medicine's working. You got here just in time." Lena's breath caught. Her knees nearly buckled with relief. "Can I see her?" The nurse nodded. For a few minutes. Inside, her mother lay beneath white sheets, a thin line of life that flickered but hadn't gone out. Lena took her hand gently. "Mama," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They gave you the medicine. You're going to be okay." Clara's eyelids fluttered and her fingers twitched weakly around her daughter's hand. "You're my brave girl," she murmured. "My little fighter." Lena smiled through her tears, pressing her mother's hand to her lips. But deep inside, fear still coiled tight. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The next morning, the city woke under a gray sky. Lena returned to the market early, pretending to sell water again, though she barely had the strength to lift her crate. She needed to act normal. But as she walked past a cafe, a newspaper on the counter caught her eye. Her heart dropped. Across the front page, philanthropist Alexander Holt reports, "Theft, it's not about the money." There was a photo of him standing by the police station, and beneath it a line that made her blood run cold. Authorities believe the thief may be a child. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The world around her tilted. It wasn't just a wallet anymore. It was a man with power money and the city on his side. He could find her, destroy her, undo everything she'd done for her mother. She thought of the hospital bills, of the medicine already dripping into her mother's veins, of how quickly it could all disappear if they found out where the money came from. She felt trapped between salvation and damnation, both of her own making. By midday, she found herself back at the small chapel behind the hospital where she'd hidden the wallet before. She knelt in front of the altar, hands trembling. "Please tell me what to do," she whispered. "If I give it back, they'll take Mama's medicine. If I keep it, I'm a thief." Her voice cracked. "I just wanted her to live." She sat there for a long time, staring at the crucifix until the shadows stretched long across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang for evening mass. She didn't know that, at that same hour, Alexander Holt was standing in the same hospital corridor holding a printed list of patients that had been paid with cash. His gaze landed on one name, Clara Novak, and something inside him stilled. The fire that had begun with her desperate choice was spreading fast, and neither of them knew that the heat of it would soon consume both their lives. The morning light filtered weakly through the thin hospital curtains. The world outside went on as usual. Buses roared past, vendors shouted by the river. But inside the small room, everything was quiet, except for the soft, steady rhythm of Clara Novak's breathing. Lena sat in the hard wooden chair beside the bed, her head resting on her mother's thin arm. For the first time in days, her mother was sleeping peacefully. The color had begun to return to her cheeks. The medicine was working. Lena should have felt relief, but all she could feel was the weight of the wallet in her lap, the wallet that wasn't hers. She turned it over slowly, her fingers brushing the worn leather, and when she opened it again, her eyes fell on the photograph tucked behind the ID. She stared at it for a long time. A young woman beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms, smiling toward someone behind the camera. The light hit her face just right. The same slope of the nose, the same eyes, the same faint smile that lived on Clara's face when she was happy. It couldn't be coincidence. She turned the photo over, hoping for a name, but there was nothing except a faint ink mark. Then her gaze landed on the business card tucked into the next pocket. Alexander Holt International Group, Canary Wharf, London. The card shimmered faintly in the dim light. In the corner, embossed in silver, was a small family crest, 2 interlocking branches tied together by a ribbon. Her heart began to pound. She reached for the locket at her neck and held it up. The same crest was carved into the back of it. Identical. For a long moment she just sat there, the sound of her mother's breathing filling the silence. The world seemed to tilt slightly. The locket had been her mother's most sacred object. Clara had told her never to lose it, that it was the only thing that connected them to where they came from. Lena never understood what that meant until now. Her fingers tightened around the pendant. Who was this man? The billionaire she had stolen from was somehow connected to her mother. The thought sent a shiver through her. She looked at her mother again, the lines of exhaustion etched deep into her face, the rise and fall of her chest under the thin blanket. Clara needed rest, not more questions, so Lena made a decision. She would return the wallet herself. She would find this man, and she would ask him what that photograph meant. She left a note for her mother on the bedside table. "I'm going to fix what I broke. Don't worry, I'll come back soon." Then she slipped out of the hospital, clutching the wallet under her arm. The air outside smelled of rain and car exhaust. Clouds hung heavy over Lisbon, threatening to burst. She walked quickly through the narrow streets, reading the business card again and again, as if it might tell her more. Holt International had an office listed near the river. It wasn't far. Her heart raced with every step. The building was all glass and marble, too clean, too cold, too bright. People in suits passed her without a glance. Lena hesitated by the revolving doors before stepping inside. The marble floor gleamed beneath her dusty shoes. A woman at the reception desk looked up, startled by the sight of a small girl in a wrinkled yellow dress clutching a leather wallet. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Lena nodded. "I need to see Mr. Holt, please." The receptionist frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Lena said quietly, "but I have something that belongs to him." She lifted the wallet with both hands. The woman froze for a second, then motioned for her to wait. She picked up the phone and spoke quickly in low tones. When she hung up, her eyes fell on the silver locket resting against Lena's collarbone. "That's a lovely necklace," she said. "My mom gave it to me," Lena replied. The woman's brow furrowed. "You said your name is Lena. Lena Novak." The receptionist's hand hesitated on the phone again. She looked like she wanted to ask something but didn't. Mr. Holt just returned to the building. "Wait here." A few minutes later, the elevator doors slid open across the lobby. A tall man stepped out, the same man Lena had seen in the market days ago, the man whose wallet she'd stolen, the one who had chased her through the streets. He was dressed in another sharp suit, his expression distant, composed, until he saw her. He stopped mid-step. His gaze dropped to the wallet, then to her face, then to the silver locket glinting faintly under the lights. For a long, unbearable second, neither of them spoke. Lena swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I took it. I didn't mean to, but my mother, she was dying. I had no choice." The words came out all at once, desperate, almost choking. She thrust the wallet toward him. "Here, I brought it back. Every cent that's left. You can take it all." Alexander Holt's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. "What's your name, Lena?" "Lena Novak." Something flickered in his expression. Confusion first, then something deeper, something almost like recognition. "Did you say Novak?" Lena nodded. "My mom's name is Clara Novak. She's in the hospital." The air between them shifted. Holt's face went pale. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same photograph Lena had seen earlier. He placed it on the counter, turning it toward her. "Is this your mother?" Lena's breath caught. "Yes, that's her, when she was younger." For the first time since the day she stole his wallet, Lena felt fear give way to something stranger, disbelief. Holt stared at the photograph, then at the girl, as if the universe had just played a trick on him. He turned to the receptionist. "Clear my schedule." His voice was quiet but firm. "Now." He gestured for Lena to follow him toward the elevator. She hesitated, uncertain. He noticed and said, "You're safe. I promise." They rode in silence to the top floor. The elevator walls reflected them side by side, a man who looked like he belonged to another world, and a barefoot child who didn't belong anywhere. When the doors opened, he led her into his office overlooking the Tagus River. The space was sleek, filled with sunlight and framed photos of people in suits shaking hands. He gestured for her to sit. "Tell me everything," he said. And she did every word, every moment, from the first cough to the hospital bill to the fall of his wallet in the market square. She didn't cry this time. She just told the truth, her voice steady and small. When she finished, Holt sat very still. Then he leaned back and looked at her with eyes that seemed to see through time. "Your mother," he said quietly, "used to work for one of my partners in Madrid. Years ago, she was the kindest woman I ever met." His gaze drifted toward the window, his reflection faint in the glass. "I cared for her once, but I wasn't honest with her. I was married then." Lena stared frozen. The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Holt's voice softened. "I never saw her again after that. I looked for her. I swear I did. And then years later." He gestured helplessly at the wallet. "That photograph stayed with me because I couldn't forget her." Lena's heart pounded so loudly she thought he could hear it. She gripped the locket at her throat. She said, "My father died before I was born." He looked at her and his eyes filled with something raw and unmistakable. "She was protecting you," he said. And maybe she was protecting herself too. The truth landed between them, quiet, undeniable, and alive. The man she had stolen from wasn't just a stranger. He was her father. For a long moment, neither spoke. The river shimmered in the window behind them. Lena pressed the locket to her heart and whispered almost to herself, "Mama said this would lead me back home someday." Holt nodded slowly, his voice barely a breath. And it just did. The drive back to the hospital felt endless. Neither of them spoke. The rain had started a soft mist that blurred the city lights as the car wound through Lisbon's narrow streets. Lena sat stiffly beside Alexander Holt, clutching the locket at her throat, her mind spinning. The truth echoed over and over. He's my father. The words didn't make sense yet. They didn't fit inside her. She could still see her mother's pale face, still hear her voice saying, "Never steal, no matter how hard it gets." And now, everything that had come after that promise led her here, sitting next to the man she had stolen from the man her mother had once loved, the man she had never known. Alexander's hands rested on his knees, his posture still, but his jaw was tight. His world built on control, precision, and reputation had shifted under him. He wasn't thinking about his company, his meetings, or his wealth. He was thinking about a woman he had lost years ago, a woman who had chosen silence over destruction. He had always believed the past was behind him. Now that past had a name and a face, Lena and she was sitting beside him, her small frame shaking with quiet determination. When they arrived, the hospital corridors were half lit and hushed. Nurses moved like shadows between rooms. Lena led the way to her mother's ward. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. When they stepped inside, Clara Novak turned her head slowly from the pillow. Her eyes widened. For a moment, disbelief froze her face. Then her breath caught not from illness, but from recognition. "You," she whispered. Her voice cracked like paper tearing. She pushed herself upright, wincing with the effort. "Who let this man in here?" Lena stepped forward. "Mama, please." But Clara's voice rose sharp and trembling. Get out, Alexander. You have no right to be here." He didn't move. His gaze softened, full of something close to grief. "Clara," he said quietly, "I didn't know." If you had known," she interrupted, her hand trembling as she pointed at him, "you would have done exactly what you're doing now, showing up when it's too late." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't get to walk in here and pretend you care. Not after the way you left." Lena stood frozen between them, her heart pounding. "Mama, please stop yelling. You'll hurt yourself." Clara's breath came in shallow bursts. "Do you know who this man is, Lena? He's the one I told you about, the one who made promises he didn't keep." Lena turned to Alexander. "Is it true you left her?" He looked at the floor, his voice low. "Yes, but I didn't know she was pregnant. She disappeared before I found out. I tried to find her, Clara. I swear I did." Clara gave a small bitter laugh. "You didn't look hard enough." He stepped closer to the bed, his tone gentle but steady. "Maybe not, but I'm here now. And I want to make things right. There's no fixing the past," Clara said. Her voice wavered, but her eyes were steady. "You think money can erase years of pain? You think you can walk in here and be her father now?" Lena's small voice broke through the tension. "Stop." Both of them turned to her. Tears streaked her cheeks. "I didn't steal because I wanted money. I stole because I was scared of losing you, Mama. I promised you I'd never steal, but I broke it to keep you alive. And if I hadn't, you'd be gone." Her voice trembled. "And now he's here. Maybe God wanted this." The room went silent, except for the faint hum of the machines. Clara covered her face with one hand, shoulders shaking. Alexander stood at the foot of the bed, helpless. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Clara lowered her hand, her voice quieter, almost tired. "You're her father, yes. I can't change that. But she's my daughter. I raised her. I kept her safe. I carried her through everything alone. You can't come back now and rewrite that." Alexander nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to take her from you." His voice was steady, stripped of pride. "I just want to help. I owe you both more than I can ever repay." Clara studied him for a long moment. There was no forgiveness yet, but something in her expression softened, a kind of weary acceptance. "Help her," she said finally, not me. I've already made my peace with what life gave me, but she deserves better. If you want to do something, give her the chance I couldn't. Lena moved to her mother's side and took her hand. Mama, don't talk like that. You're going to get better. Clara smiled weakly. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But you'll live. That's what matters. Her eyes turned to Alexander. If you mean what you say, prove it. Not with words, but with what you do for her. Alexander nodded once his throat tight. I will. He turned to Lena. You have my word. Outside the room, the hallway seemed colder. Alexander leaned against the wall, his hands shaking slightly, the weight of a promise pressing down on him. For years, he had built walls around his life, brick by brick, convincing himself that success meant redemption. But now, redemption looked nothing like a boardroom or a charity gala. It looked like a little girl with her mother's eyes, and a courage he'd never earned. Later that night, he stood by the hospital window overlooking the river. The rain had stopped, and the city shimmered under the streetlights. Behind him, he heard a faint sound, Lena's footsteps. She joined him by the glass, her reflection small beside his. Are you really going to help us? She asked. He turned toward her, meeting her gaze. Yes, I'll make sure your mother gets everything she needs. And you'll go back to school. You'll have a home that's safe, a future that's yours. She studied him for a moment as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then she nodded slowly. Mama said, life is like a thread. Sometimes it breaks before the cloth is done. Maybe this is how it gets fixed. Alexander smiled faintly, though his eyes were wet. Maybe it is. When he left the hospital that night, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance not to erase the past, but to carry it to make it matter. And as he stepped out into the quiet street, the promise he had made echoed in his chest. It wasn't a promise to the world or to his wealth. It was to the two people who had unknowingly held his heart all along, Clara and the little girl who'd stolen it back. The days that followed moved with a quiet rhythm like a new song Lena was still learning the words to. Clara grew stronger each morning, her color returning, her laughter soft and rare, beginning to fill the small hospital room again. Alexander kept his promise. The bills were paid, the medicines continued, and the doctors began speaking in hopeful tones. He never made a show of his generosity. He simply appeared when he was needed, and when Clara was discharged, he was there again, waiting by the doors with a gentle smile and a car that gleamed under the Lisbon sun. But Clara refused the car. "We'll take a taxi," she said, her voice steady but kind. "I'm not ready for your world yet, Alexander." He didn't argue. He simply nodded, opened the taxi door for her himself, and followed them home in silence. The small apartment still smelled faintly of damp wood and detergent. The paint was peeling, and the roof leaked when it rained. But to Clara it was home, a place built with her hands, her sacrifices, and her stubborn hope. She sat on her bed looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it's ours." Alexander looked at the cracks in the walls, the thin curtains fluttering in the wind, and something inside him shifted. He had built skyscrapers, owned estates across Europe, yet nothing he'd built had ever felt this alive. "You shouldn't have to live like this," he said quietly. "Let me help you start fresh." But Clara shook her head. "You already have. I don't need a mansion, I just need peace, and for Lena to have a chance." That chance came sooner than anyone expected. Within weeks, Alexander had arranged for Lena to attend one of the best schools in the city, the kind of place she used to stare at from across the street. The first morning she wore her new uniform, Clara stood behind her adjusting the collar with trembling hands. "You look beautiful," she whispered, "like the girl I dreamed you'd become." Lena threw her arms around her mother and held her tight. When they stepped outside, Alexander's car was waiting at the curb. This time, Clara didn't protest. She placed a hand on his arm and said, "Thank you." The months that followed rewrote their lives in small, graceful ways. Lena excelled in school. Her teachers admired her curiosity, her quiet strength, and the way she listened before she spoke. Alexander visited every weekend. Sometimes he brought books or flowers, sometimes just himself, and an eagerness to hear about her week. He never tried to take her from Clara. He respected the boundaries Clara had drawn, grateful just to be part of Lena's world. On Saturday mornings, they'd walk through the park together, father and daughter, the unspoken years between them, slowly filling with laughter, stories, and forgiveness. Clara, true to her word, rebuilt her independence. With a small loan from a local charity, she opened a tiny flower shop near the market. The air inside smelled of soil and lavender, and sunlight spilled through the window onto the rows of potted blooms. She named it Petal and Thread. When Alexander came by for the first time, he smiled at the sign. "That's perfect," he said. "Why that name?" Clara looked up from arranging tulips and said, "Because some threads never break. They just wait to be woven back together." One evening, as the city lights began to flicker across the river, Lena stood in front of her school's auditorium. It was her first recital, a speech competition she had practiced for weeks. In the audience sat Clara, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and Alexander beside her, his eyes proud and glistening. When Lena stepped up to the microphone, she didn't read from the paper she'd written. She spoke from her heart. "My mother once told me, life is like a thread," she began. "Sometimes it breaks before the cloth is done. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it finds its way back together again. I used to think I had to carry everything alone. But now I know that love, real love, never disappears. It waits, it forgives, it begins again." The room erupted in applause, but Lena looked only at her mother and her father. Clara was crying, smiling through her tears, and Alexander's hand rested gently over his heart. In that moment, all the pain, the loss, the years of silence, they didn't vanish, but they no longer held the power they once did. The broken thread had been mended. That night, the three of them walked home under the Lisbon sky stars flickering above the rooftops. Clara took Lena's hand, and on Lena's other side, Alexander matched her stride. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The past had already said enough. What remained was quiet, simple, and unshakable, the kind of peace that comes only after the storm. The city breathed around them, alive and forgiving. And somewhere deep inside, Lena knew the truth: she hadn't just saved her mother's life. She had saved them all. In the end, Lena's story was never just about a little girl stealing a wallet. It was about love in its purest, most desperate form, the kind that drives a child to face fear, to break a promise, and still find redemption through courage. What began as an act of survival became a bridge between two broken lives, a daughter fighting for her mother, and a man rediscovering his humanity through the child he never knew he had. From the crowded streets of Lisbon to the quiet rooms of a hospital, this story traced the fragile threads that tie us together: forgiveness, faith, and the stubborn hope that even when life unravels, it can be mended again. Lena's journey reminds us that doing the right thing isn't always clean or easy. Sometimes love demands risk. Sometimes redemption comes disguised as loss. It teaches us that no matter how far we drift from each other, compassion can still find its way home. In our own lives, we can carry that truth to forgive when it's hardest to act with empathy, and to believe that one brave choice can change everything. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on someone who deserves your forgiveness, your call, or your second chance. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us what humanity truly means, Make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating stories that touch souls and bring hope back into the world.